People often ask me for my favorite Shark Tank episode, and that's a tough question. It's like asking me who my favorite child is. I have learned so much from each episode, and I loved each and every one. But the truth is that the episode that you are about to hear has a special place in my heart, and here's why. One of the fundamental goals of Shark Tank was to solicit advice and inspiration from role models with more experience than me. But in today's episode, I speak to two listeners who are younger than I am. Despite their age, I found both of them extremely insightful and inspiring. Today is the second and final episode of our mailbag, at least for now. Both conversations are follow-ups on the episodes with Zevi Reinitz. In our very first Shark Tank episode, we spoke about the importance of writing, and Izy Muller took this conversation to heart. That's part 1. Part 2 is about some of the mental health and psychology topics that we discussed in the Balabatish Questions series. Nachum Goldstein found these episodes very powerful, and he opens up about his own struggles with mental health and Torah learning. Before we begin, a quick reminder that we have a quiet WhatsApp group where we post new episodes, bonus content, and other special projects. We just launched a new Daf Yomi initiative, and there are other ideas that are being cooked up as we speak. You can join the WhatsApp group with the link in the show notes. I would also like to thank everyone who reached out to wish me well with our move. Baruch Hashem, things are going great so far. Some people have expressed interest in hearing a bit more about my story, where I moved to, what I will be doing now that I left Kollel, and more. Maybe we will discuss this more in a future episode. Please let me know if you would find this interesting. My email is in the show notes. And now on to this week's episode. My name is Yaakov Wolf, and this is Shark Tank. So we are having a number of discussions following up on previous episodes of Shark Tank, and we are joined now by Izy Muller, who had some very interesting feedback on the conversations with Zevi Reinitz. So Izy, why don't you start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what you're up to right now?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Izy. We live in St. Louis, my wife and I, and we just had our first child 8 weeks ago. We're actually at this current moment on our way to Eretz Yisrael, which is very exciting. We're making Aliyah. So we just sent all of our stuff on a lift, and in about 6 weeks, we're flying to Eretz Yisrael, moving to a community called Karmei Gat, which we're extremely excited about. And I went to school in St. Louis at Washington University in St. Louis, loved it, studied psychology and brain sciences. And then I learned for a year in the Kollel in St. Louis, which I also loved. And then this past year, I started working in a psychology job, which I found extremely meaningful, but definitely challenging at times, trying to balance various goals of mine and also integrating my Torah religious lifestyle, trying to connect to Hashem in every part of my life, and especially and in addition in the workplace. So I found that challenging. And a friend of mine said, you should listen to Shark Tank, so that's why I started listening. And I immediately loved it. And especially the episode with Zevi. It was very inspiring for me. Primarily because I remember I came home one day and said to my wife, oh, there are other people who are thinking in the same terms that I'm thinking in, that are really striving to be great in these various arenas of their life and not compromising on one or the other. And yeah, I love listening to each of the interviews.
Yeah, that's great. And it's really been special. That was definitely one of the primary goals, is to sort of create this virtual community where people like you and like me can really feel at home and feel connected and feel like we're not on this lonely journey, but we're alongside others and following in the paths of others who have done the same. And you mentioned to me that you were really touched by Zevi's amazing project of putting out Sfarim, despite the fact that he is a balabas and he is a marketing executive. So tell us a little bit about what you thought, what you felt when you heard that story, and what was the action item that you took from it.
Yeah, you're right. I loved that story. I loved listening to really his attitude of still striving and growth and moving to the next level of Talmud Torah. Now integrating his Talmud Torah and writing it and sharing it. I love that idea so much. And especially when he said around simchas, family simchas, that really connected with me. This idea of like connecting your Talmud Torah with your family. It was very geschmack. And I said, you know what? My wife at the time was, I think, 6 months pregnant. I said, I've always wanted to write. I enjoy writing. It's a creative outlet for me in general. Really, I have a certain chiddush. I had it in my mind for like a few months. I said, but let me really try to put pen to paper and start writing this up. So I just started, I don't know, like it just one night I just said to my wife, okay, I'm going to open my computer and start writing. I'll see what comes out. And then slowly, like an hour here, an hour there, a couple nights a week, um, I started writing, and it turned into a kuntrus that I wouldn't say I published, but I brought into the world at our son's Pidyon event. So it was very special, and I was honestly inspired by Zevi. Like I don't think I would have done it otherwise, but just the idea that okay, now it's time for the next stage of one's Talmud Torah, where you can really integrate different things you've learned, be mechadesh something out of that integration. I love that so much, and especially on the next stage in terms of having a family, like having a son. I think on the cover page I wrote it should be like to mishamish keschos li galu le Torah chopa masim tovim, like that. The whole idea of like okay, we're raising a family now. Torah is going to be integrated into it, and just because I'm working, there's no reason why that shouldn't be the forefront of my mind and my priority and something that I'm excited to do. So yeah, it was definitely something I'm proud of that I was able to, produce a real work of Torah, and I hope that it continues the future simples and maybe turns into our full-fledged sefer one day.
That's very, very special on many levels, and I do think that point also struck me as being fascinating and very profound. The fact that what we strive for and consider successful coming out of yeshiva is this very high level Torah learning, and then you start getting married and you have kids, and your wife doesn't necessarily appreciate your chiddush and tosfos, and your 4-year-old or your 3-year-old doesn't necessarily care about the intricacies of a shach that you just learned. So
Right.
that's a sort of tension and challenge that a lot of us face. And this way, and I think Zevi said it very interestingly when his daughter was remarking about the cover of the sefer I was going to have for her bat mitzvah. So it's interesting because she's not exactly appreciating the depth, and she could have written anything in there, and as long as the cover had the right color scheme, would have been probably good enough for his bat mitzvah age daughter. But it is
Right.
interesting and fascinating. And look, I think there's no it's a conversation that we all need to be having, and this is definitely a special one. A special way of doing it. I'm wondering if in the process of writing the Sefer, you had any sort of bumps in the road or any like points where you got stuck and thought that you might not be able to get from that point A of putting pen to paper and to the point B of getting the conscious out into the world.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely did. I would say for me, I feel like there are different levels of one's Talmud Torah. There's a basic level of learning, and that's a wonderful thing. I think there's an even higher level when you chazer it and you actually know it very well. And sometimes people can take some sort of bechina or a test, or even just talking with someone and learning. When you clearly know it and remember it, that's a good feeling. Like that's I think a next madriga. But what this did for me was made me say like not only do I know it and remember it, but can I articulate it in a way that someone else who has not learned the introductory material can truly grasp a what I'm saying and why is it a chiddush? Like what am I bringing to the table here? And that was I think the first time I've really had to do that in a systematic, formulaic way. That I said, okay, I want to start from the beginning, a middle, and an end. I want to be able to move the whoever is learning this, which might be known in the end, but whoever in theory, like to really speak out the sugya in a way that makes so much logical sense and really has a flow to it. And there were times where I really thought that I knew it, like the sugya happened to be in the sugya of davar sheish matirin, and I was like, I know this by like I could say it. I could say it in a way that's not, oh yeah, like a little bit there. I could kind of mince my words here and there. But when you're actually writing it out, it's very clear whether what you're saying is gibberish or not. And to be able to take the time and edit and revise and really articulate Torah in a clear, concise way was something that I struggled with. But I think that just helped me reach, I think, a next madriga in Talmud Torah, which was in and of itself that became meaningful for me.
You sort of are echoing the sentiment from Jeff Bezos, where he requires everyone on Amazon to really write out their thoughts in great detail because he says that forces you to really think through the issues in a comprehensive manner. I don't think you adjust the question, and you don't have to, but were there points between the time that you heard the episode and said, let's start writing, till the time that you put out the contrast, that you felt that you got sort of stuck or got into a trap of some sort, and you doubted that this project was ever going to see the light of day?
I think there was one moment. There was one moment where I said, like, truthfully, is anyone going to learn this in the entire world? Is anyone going to sit down and learn this? There are so many Svarim out there. There's so much Svarim coming out every single day. I'm a random no one who I don't even know if this Chiddush is worthy to be learned by anyone, and is it really going to be learned? And I think that the moment of overcoming for me was saying that actually doesn't matter to me if it's never learned. I'm not necessarily trying to provide something for someone else, though that would be wonderful. It truly was an exercise in a connection between me and Hashem, that I have received Hashem's Torah and I am like molding it and shaping it and finding connections in it that I don't think had been revealed previously. So in that bin adam lemakom and bin adam la'atzmo, that itself was meaningful, and I almost stopped because I was like, there was a day or two where I was hesitant. Even a good use of my time? But when I finally thought about it and said, yes, I'm getting so much out of this, and I'm connecting to Hashem through this process, then I was able to keep going with it.
That's really interesting. And it's sort of, the writing method this way is cool because, like, when you think about someone who, like, he gives a shear and he has that type of thought that you had, like, does anyone really need this shear? Well, it's good for my learning, it's good for my connection to Kadosh
Right,
Baruch Hu.
right.
Well, then you have 5 people sitting in front of you, or you're wasting their time on some level. But when you're writing, okay, you could have it in your right, the Sifrei, what do they call it in the Gemara and the Rishonim, the Sifrei Genizos, that certain Amoraim or Tanaim would have their writings in their own closet. So
Mhm.
that's it's a great way to have that bin adam lamakom connection and not necessarily subject anyone who's not interested to that. But that's a
Right,
different dynamic. Maybe deserves further discussion at
right.
a different point.
And I'll add just one other aspect, which is I remember I heard a story once of the Leshem Shvo V'Achlama, one of the biggest Mikubalim in the past few centuries. Obviously, don't compare myself to him in any way, but he left tens of thousands of pieces of paper with his chidushim on it, and these were extremely, extremely esoteric, intricate remarks on the Eitz Chaim and the writings of the Rashash, and trying to integrate his Rebbe the Gra into all these writings. And like as he was dying, the last couple of days before he passed away, someone asked, like, "Are you happy that? Like, who was that for?" And he said, "One day, maybe there'll be people." And it turns out the Leshem now is far more being learned, tremendously. And now there's been a whole revival of learning the Leshem's farm. So again, I'm not saying my country is that, but you never know when you throw out something in the world. Maybe some, Jew on some part of the world gets some sort of something from that. Then it's worth it, even if you might not even see it happen with your eyes.
I think it's very true, and I think that specifically nowadays, I think we discussed this a little bit with Rabbi Reuven Tarragon with today's mass communication. So it could be that in the past, the 15 people who really need your kuntras would never have access to it. But today,
Right.
it's simple. The 15 people who need it are going to Google that sugya, and they're going to find it,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to be able to find Aziz Chiddush and Davar sheyesh lo matir.
I better upload it then if someone's gonna do that.
And I have to upload my courses as well because the online version is not yet available, but I should definitely do that. So now we both have homework to do. Izzy, thank
Okay.
you so much for
So
taking the time and sharing this inspiring story with us.
thanks, Yaakov. I appreciate everything you're doing and the inspiration you provided to me.
And I look forward to connecting with you when you've completed your journey and we're in the same country soon, Bezrat Hashem. When I started Shark Tank, the ideal listener that I had in mind was really Balabatim, people who are in the business world. And I guess it shouldn't have been so surprising that a lot of Klei Kodesh and educators have also really enjoyed the podcast. I guess if you're not in the business world, you're educating people who are either Balabatim or future people who are going to be in the business world. So it has been well received among educators and Rabbanim as well. And today we are joined by Nachum Goldstein, who is a longtime friend and also has his own experience in the broadcast booth. But Nachum, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you're up to these days.
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here. You should know that I look forward to doing dishes at night with your podcast. So it's a big service to Klal Yisrael, so thank you. So my name is Nachum Goldstein. I'm 25 years old. I live with my wife and daughter in Neve Daniel. I teach in Yeshiva Makor Chaim. I actually went there for high school, so it's nice to be on the other side of the desk, I suppose. After high school, I went to Har Etzion. I studied there for 7 years. I did my army service there. And I'm actually just finishing up my degree in education from Herzog College. a bachelor's in education.
Okay, you reached out to me with some really special feedback after the series with Zevi Reinitz called Balbatish Questions. And there, specifically in the second and third episodes, we really got into some things that relate to the world of mental health and how we are motivated and how we are jealous and how we compare ourselves to others. And that really struck a chord with you. So can you tell us why?
Absolutely. So I have a bit of experience with mental health history. I had OCD. I guess we'll get into that also, had versus having and that whole thing. But I started experiencing what later I found out would be a pure O, meaning it's a form of OCD that's only thought-based. Just a lot of intrusive thoughts regarding my avodas Hashem, how I'm doing, how I'm not doing, what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong. And at a certain point, I realized that it's beyond, I think, the threshold of what should be considered a normal, healthy thoughts and sort of wanting to improve. It just became really not just all-encompassing, but it just stifled my ability to do anything really. And it was just a constant barrage of thoughts. Like I'd be sitting in morning seder learning, and this voice inside my head would be going, you're not learning well enough, or you call that and what's the matter with you? I would try to get up to take a snack break. It's a 4.5 hour morning seder. Like it's legitimate to want to eat or have a coffee break at 10 a.m. I think that's okay. But in my head, it wasn't okay. And every single move I made that wasn't, focused on learning, and even if it was focused on learning, I was just constantly subjected to this inner critic, and it would not stop. And at a certain point, it just got out of hand. Luckily, my mother's a psychiatrist, so I was able to ask her, beyond just motherly support on a professional level, is this normal? And she, lovingly suggested that I'm not as bad as I think I am, and maybe I should get some help, which I did, thank God. And it took some time and a lot of work, therapy, medication, but I got past it. And still, it's hard to say that you don't have OCD anymore. It's still there. It's there in the background. But as far as my functioning for the past 5-6 years, I've really been not only better, but I think better than I was, as far as the perspectives that I've gained and things that I've learned throughout the way, and just building a whole new dimension to myself personally and my avodas Hashem in general, my relationship to it. So
maybe a couple follow-up questions on that. So in the episode, we had talked about this idea of self-talk, and you referenced this voice in your head. So throughout this journey where you've had to learn the hard way about that, what do we need to know about that voice in our head, and what are the important things to know about giving it its space, controlling it? What do we need to know about that?
So the voice in our head is real on the one hand, and it's fake on the other, meaning it's real in the sense that it's part of you. We're constantly talking to ourselves, whether we're aware of it or not. Like we usually view someone talking to himself, oh, that's weird, he's talking to himself, but we're constantly talking to ourselves. We just don't necessarily think of it that way. In my specific case, again, I was in a yeshiva setting, so the self-talk really, and that's part of OCD too. It's sort of it manifests itself in the setting either that you're in or that you find important to you. Meaning somebody who's not a religious Jew won't experience OCD in the realm of I'm not learning Yidden well enough, or I'm not davening properly. It'll manifest itself in other ways. I'll add parenthetically, studies have been done about this, how religion, and it's not that religion is a factor in increasing OCD amongst the population. Like that's irrelevant. It just manifests itself on whatever a person finds himself in, that wherever he is. In my specific case, so my self-talk really revolved around my performance in yeshiva and how I'm doing in my avodas Hashem. What I had to learn, again, both through therapy and also through Sfarim that were extremely helpful and valuable, and I really am so thankful that I was able to, both to friends who suggested things to me, therapists who mentioned sources to me, and just my own digging that I did in the Har Etzion library, that really helped me differentiate between a voice inside my head and an inner voice, inner critic, whatever, that's actually beneficial and true to Torah values and what the Torah has to say, and one that's not. If you want to put it in Musar terms, it's just the Yetzer Hara and a talis and tefillin, and Hasidic terms as well. Both schools speak about this. How a thought that seemingly seems to be geared towards self-improvement could just be the Yetzer Hara, and that's something that exists, and it's important to know that. A thought of self-improvement isn't necessarily religious in nature, isn't necessarily positive in nature. So part of the process that I went through was being able to differentiate between those two. And it's hard because, what could be bad about a thought saying you should be learning more, or maybe you shouldn't be slacking off so much? Like, why is that a bad thing? But it could be, and it could be hard to differentiate, but that was part of the process that I went through. learning to notice what thought is real and I should pay attention to, and what thought I should just disregard and say, okay, that's the Yetzer Hara, or that's my OCD talking. That's not real.
Can you share with us some of the most important works that you found, both books that maybe people might want to check out, and also I'm always curious about like Chazal, sort of primary sources within our literature that are of special relevance to this topic?
Absolutely. A book that the first sefer, I suppose, that I came across was Gateway to Happiness by Zevi Reinitz. Super helpful, super helpful. It's basically it's a book that sort of, it's I don't know the best way to explain it, but it just calls together a bunch of sources from Chazal, Rishonim, Achronim, and Musar Chasidus. It's called Gateway to Happiness. It doesn't only deal with happiness, but there's a whole chapter there on things having to do with self-talk, basically. He just brings a lot of sources. I think Zevi Reinitz mentioned the Rabbeinu Yonah in the Shari Avoda, in the podcast that you referenced. That was a source that I mamash feel that I've internalized until today. I think about it all the time. I could say also, working in chinuch, I'm very sensitive. I joke with my wife, maybe oversensitive. Any slight, if I see a Talmud who's like being especially hard on himself, that just all the red lights go off in my mind. Like, okay, maybe I should show him this source, maybe I should show him that source. If he's shuckling a bit too hard in Slach Lanu, then maybe something's up. But anyway, so going back to Rav Zevi Reinitz, so he has a bunch of sources. Rabbeinu Yonah is one of them. So that book I found extremely helpful. There's a famous letter that Rav Hutner wrote in Igros Uksaven. I think it's a letter, page ratio design, if I'm not mistaken. I know it because I've just read it countless times, and it's really, again, these sources, they were mamash lifelines for me. Where Rav Hutner writes to a Talmud who was, clearly going through it. We don't know the questions that he was asked, but based on the answers, we're able to know, more or less what the question was. And the Talmud was clearly going through some, big difficulties in yeshiva and his own avodas Hashem. Rav Hutner basically calmed him down and said, listen, the fact that you're struggling, you in your mind, you think that a big tzaddik is someone who doesn't experience any difficulty. He said that's just not true. Like, we think the Chafetz Chaim, and we just assume that, he never spoke Lashon Hara in his life. Ma pitom, like, of course he did. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. He worked on himself endlessly. We only see the finished product. I think it was Rameir Torsky who said once, the Chafetz Chaim wasn't born, with covering his ears because the people in the hospital were speaking Lashon Hara. It doesn't work like that. He worked on himself. That letter was extremely helpful. Eitzos V'Adrachos, which is an incredible sefer written by Rav Greenwald, I believe his name is, a psychotherapist in Muncie, and it's based on letters with the Stipler. And he would ask the Stipler all sorts of shilas surrounding his patients. He had a lot of from patients struggling with all sorts of issues in the mental health world. And those letters also were incredible. A lot of them are both halachic in nature, but Rav Greenwald sort of took those answers and made more, I suppose, hashkafic essays based on those shutim, and they were also incredible, and they were super helpful. Some of them touching directly on things that I was going through, and others just more in general, but I also found very helpful. So yeah, those are sort of the big three that come to mind. But again, there's plenty of stuff out there.
Another question which comes up based off of this discussion, these ideas, is the balance between ambition and drive and high standards versus beating yourself up. So just to speak it out, if I were to tell you that, you really, you just learn Kitzur Shulchan Aruch for 3 minutes a day. Okay, that's a very low standard, and you'll probably never end up beating yourself up, because I'm sure anyone who's listening to this could, if that was all they tried to do, learn Kitzur Shulchan Aruch for 3 minutes a day. But when we start to think about greatness, think about growth, think about high potential and high stakes, so then the potential for really feeling upset about my performance, feeling that I'm not where I'm supposed to be doing, that really comes the more you're able to set up ambition. On the other hand, that ambition is obviously a driving force that can really push people to do great things. So what's your take on that dynamic?
For sure. That is the big question. Again, beyond my story was more rooted in the mental health side of things, but even if someone doesn't have OCD, obviously the question is very relevant. How do you strike that balance between ambition and drive versus complacency? I'll say maybe something a bit radical, and then I'll tame it down. If you had to ask me to choose a side, like, would I rather be all the way on the side of complacency or all the way on the side of just total drive and ambition? This may be a bit unpopular, but I would go with complacency. And I think the reason for that, and this now I'll try to qualify that statement. There's always where to go from there. Meaning, if you're complacent, you can learn la'at, each at his own pace to try to strive for more, and you'll be in this constant path towards growth. okay, you'll start, you'll learn your 3 minutes of Kitzur Shulchan Aruch a day. Ideally, of course, you should strive for more, but you could do that incrementally, and each one, learning what works for him and how he could gently push himself further. The the flip side is that if you're all the way in as far as ambition, you could just have a total breakdown. And I remember speaking with Rosh Yeshiva Moshe Lichtenstein when I was going through this, the struggle was when I was in Shir Aleph, my first year in yeshiva. So I remember speaking to him, and he told me the story of John Stuart Mill, who I don't recall all the details, but basically it was this like massive Ilui when he was a young kid, and his father really pushed him, physics, math, like everything. And he had a total nervous breakdown when he was, in his early 20s or late teens. And what saved him was sort of taking a step back and sort of leaning into other sides of him, more artistic sides, appreciating those sides of him, and not going full throttle when it comes to ambition. And that's really important, because sometimes people can't come back from that, when they collapse. I think there's a story about the Chafetz Chaim himself. Zevi may have alluded to this also. When he was learning, all in, at a certain point, he started having health problems, and the doctors told him he has to scale it back. And so, and thank God, it worked out, and the Chafetz Chaim continued to learn, and we have all this farm because of that. But some people aren't able to come back from that. And I think that when you err on the side of complacency, at least there's always more to improve. That's my take on it. Having said that, I think we have to be honest with ourselves and see, where am I actually, as we say in Hebrew, and I'm going too easy on myself, and I'm not pushing myself as much as I can. But even within that, I think the point that we have to be aware of is any voice that we have, going back to the voice in our head, the inner critic, if it's telling you tachlis what I can be doing, so then it's worth it to listen to that and try to take that seriously. If it's just this vague feeling of I'm not doing well enough and I'm nothing and whatever, okay, so where do I go from there? If the answer is nowhere, so then maybe that's not necessarily a healthy thought. If it's this is what I'm doing wrong, these are concrete steps I could take to improve. So I think we should really listen to that. And the challenge is being in tune with ourselves and honest with ourselves when it comes to that. But you're right, meaning that is the question at the end of the day. The balance between complacency on the one hand and striving for more on the other.
And it's a question which really goes very directly to the question of how we perceive HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his expectations of us. So based on your understanding of Chazal, how they present that sugya and how we're supposed to be thinking about, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I love you no matter what, or I really have expectations for you, or obviously some sort of something a little more nuanced than that? What's your understanding?
Here too, I mean, the problem with this is that it's very easy to take it into this like fluffy, like, oh, all's good, Hashem loves you, do whatever you want, Hakol B'Seder, which I don't think is true. I think there's a kernel of truth to that, but it has to be presented in a much more sophisticated and real way. I think that when Chazal say Bishvili Nivra Ha'olam, that a person has to say that Bishvili Nivra Ha'olam, the world was created for me. That's not an excuse to sit down and retire at age 14 and not do anything with your life. I think it's a mechayev. It means that you have a responsibility. The world was created for you, and go do something with yourself, and you have to do something, and you have talents that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you, and you have to use them. It's a push to do something. It's not an excuse to do nothing. Another very foundational Gemara for me, and this is also something that I really internalized, and I think about it all the time. The Gemara in Kiddushin, which talks about the machlokus between Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, about whether banim atem l'Hashem Elokeichem is contingent upon how we behave. According to Rabbi Yehuda, im nagu min hagbanim, if you act like good boys, then you're considered banim l'Hashem, and if not, then not. Rabbi Meir says ben kachu ben kachatem kurim banim. And the Maharal talks about this extensively, and L'maisa we paskin like Rabbi Meir. It's funny to think about paskening in this type of shaila, but I think it's the Rama who says that if there's a mumar lavodas kulchavim, he's matame ba'oel. Again, it's a very arcane subject, but it drives the point home that he's considered a Yisrael because he's a ben Lashem, even though he's a mumar lavodas kulchavim. It's a really, really important Gemara, and I actually came across this through a shir by Rav Moshe Weinberger, which would really change my life. He talks about this a lot. There was a 3-part series, I think. I don't know if the link is still on YU Torah. I tried to find it once. I couldn't find it. If I find it, maybe I'll send it to you. You can put it in the show notes.
We'll crowdsource it for the Stark Team community to find that for us and get it.
Yes, please. Because it was in response to an article basically saying how, some kids are just, forget it. They're helpless and we can't, there's nothing we could do. And they're off the derech, period, goodbye. And Rav Weinberger, he was in tears, saying how can you say such a thing? We passing like Rabbi Meir, ben kachu ben kachatim kurim banim. But here too, I think ben kachu ben kachatim kurim banim isn't an excuse to do nothing. It's a reason to act. Okay, like Hashem loves me, no matter what I do, and therefore I have a responsibility to like, okay, like meaning I'm safe. Like anything I do, Hashem will love me. Fine. So now that we say that, and again, I mean not in a fluffy way, like it's true, like it's actually true in the most deep like way possible. Now that we've established that, okay, now get a move on and keep improving because you're safe. Again, like you don't have to worry that you're not doing well enough. There's always where to improve. I mentioned Rav Torski. I think he once quoted, I want to say it's the Maori Naim, I'm not sure, that when Chazal say la'olam yasok adam Torah mitzvah shelo lishma mitoch shelo lishma ba'al lishma, it's phrased in a lechatchila way, meaning la'olam yasok shelo lishma, which seems a bit weird. Like, why should we do something shelo lishma lechatchila? But in a sense, he says that it's always going to be shelo lishma, because the more you do it shelo lishma, ba'al lishma, and once you attain that level of lishma, you realize that there are more nuanced levels of shelo lishma, which you weren't attuned to before. So you're constantly striving for more. That's the way it is. But once you do it from a place of, okay, HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves me and I'm safe, like in that existential sort of way, I know I can move forward confidently and I'll try my best. And then it's okay if I mess up and fail because, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has my back and He's there for me. And then it's okay to mess up and make mistakes. I think that you can't I don't know what the word is. You can't properly learn Shari Tshuva. Rabbeinu Yonah, who wrote the Shari Tshuva, is the same Rabbeinu Yonah who said that that the first step in Avodas Hashem is that a person has to realize that he has value, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves him and he loves the Avos, and he's a chashuv person. And again, this is the same Rabbeinu Yonah who said that is the same Rabbeinu Yonah who wrote the really harsh, tough things to swallow in the Shari Tshuva. But if you don't have that foundation of that initial statement in the Shari Avoda, that you have value no matter what you do, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu views you as a chashuv person, then you can't learn the Shari Tshuva properly, because the Shari Tshuva will just destroy you. Like, you can't learn the third paragraph of the Shari Tshuva, the third shara of the Shari Tshuva, without just feeling, oh my God, like I'm such a horrible person. But if you know, okay, like I have value, I definitely have what to improve, but okay, like I have a solid foundation. Sach hakol, I'm not as bad as I think I am. I think that's an important thought.
Okay, the last thing that the last thing that I would like to discuss in this context is the idea of comparing yourself to others, which is something that came up in the episode and is obviously a big mental health topic and a big topic nowadays. And, I think sometimes to the guy standing on the street corner in Yerushalayim, Chaimu Sharim Rak Bli Internet Bisratim, and I'm a little bit jealous of them, a little bit upset at the way they behaved to me in a certain instance, but we'll leave that aside. A little bit jealous because I do think there's a not so small kernel of truth to what they're saying. But you and I grew up in a community and in a mahalach which says that we're not going to go back in time to before the generation that we're living in. So we are living in an interconnected generation with media and social media that are ways of connecting and sharing value, sharing ideas, but also brings with it this very, very dangerous space of comparing and sort of showing off slivers of ourselves and seeing slivers of others. So I'm wondering, you personally, how do you handle that? It's such a sensitive issue for you. Is that something that you've taken drastic steps to remove yourself from based on your experiences, or do you have to find a way to find the balance?
100%. I think that's the crux of the issue in many ways. Meaning, this is something that my Shir Aleph Rabbi Rav Michai Gordon, who's now actually the Rosh Yeshiva of the Har Etzion High School, something he told me. I think he actually said it in a shir, not just to me personally, but I guess I felt like it was to me personally because that's definitely what I needed to hear at the time. I'll say it in Hebrew. He said, "Adam hayachid she'ata tzarich lashvot et atzmecha elav ze ata etmol." The only person you need to compare yourself to is yourself yesterday. Period. No one else. And that's so true, and it's so important to remember that. And not, again, going back to the whole like fluff thing. It's very easy to take, okay, nice, only compare yourself to yourself, lovely, but there's so many other people and we have to learn from them. Of course we have to learn from them, but we don't have to be them. And that's the difference. Meaning, you could learn from everybody. That's true. But there's a difference between learning from people and integrating what they do into your own life and seeing what I can learn from them and how do I apply it in my own life, to wanting to be them. I think I would say one of the most powerful sources having to do with this is the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva, when he says that Kol Echad Me'Yisrael Roy Leos Tzaddik Moshe Rabbeinu. So at first glance you see that and you say, wow, how can I be like Moshe Rabbeinu? That's impossible. You think Moshe Rabbeinu is Moshe Rabbeinu. We can't get anywhere near Moshe Rabbeinu. Obviously, the Nevuah is beyond question. Like, that's one of the Yikarim of the Rambam. We'll never attain the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. So I think it's Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, I forget where exactly, but he says that the meaning of that is that Moshe Rabbeinu maximized his potential. So when the Rambam says we have to be a tzaddik Moshe Rabbeinu, it doesn't mean be Moshe Rabbeinu, because that's impossible, and there's no reason to ask that of anybody. That's just not, no. What it does mean is that we have to look into ourselves and see what are my kochos, what are my strengths, what can I do to make myself better, and maximize that. And once I do that, that means being tzaddik Moshe Rabbeinu. Chas v'shalom, that we have to think that we have to be other people. It doesn't work like that. There's a reason why you were created as you. If you were supposed to be that other person, you would be that other person. The fact of the matter is you're not. And that's not a b'diavad. It's the most lechatchila thing there is. So you're supposed to be you. Take your kochos, learn from everybody, because that's what we're supposed to do. But it shouldn't be, I have to be him. I think Chazal, when they say that a person has to say, Matay agiyu ma'asai le'ma'asei Avram Yitzchak v'Yaakov. I forgot the exact quote. Meaning we're supposed to strive to be like the Avos, but it doesn't say Matay eheya Avram Yitzchak v'Yaakov. It says Matay yagiyu ma'asai. When it says yagiyu ma'asai, when will my deeds, when will the things I do, not who I am. So if you place the emphasis on what can I do like this person, what can I do to learn from him, that's great. We should all be doing that. But to compare yourself to other people, not just you shouldn't do that, I think that's, hashkafically, halachically, whatever term you want to call it, from a Torah-based perspective, then that's just wrong. It goes back to the famous Zusha story, the Reb Zusha story. They're not going to ask me why I was Moshe Rabbeinu, they're going to ask me why I wasn't Zusha. It's exactly that.
And with regards to social media use in your own personal life, some people say that these systems are really built and designed to maximize that unhealthy feeling. And so therefore some will say it's unsafe at any speed, which is very hard practically, but there are serious scholars, Jonathan Haidt talks about it with regards to children. I'm not so sure it's limited to children. So what do you do in that dilemma?
I'm not so active on social media. Like I have WhatsApp and Facebook is basically the extent of my, again, partly because of this. I know that if I get Instagram or TikTok, whatever, it's just not, I know in advance it's not something that I should be doing. Like for me, again, everyone, you do you, as they say, but I know for me personally, like there's just not, I don't want to go down that road. So I just keep it at that, and I just try to limit it as much as I can, just because I know for myself, like once you start seeing, okay, what he's doing, then it just leads to unnecessary criticism, and again, it's just not just like chabal to even start going there. I have enough on my own plate that I could focus on to improve without looking at what the other guy's doing. So just from a practical point of view, I just find it not helpful for me to delve too deep into social media.
Okay. Nachum Goldstein, thank you so much for sharing all these very important insights today.